Good afternoon and welcome to the chicken legalization class. The chicken legalization class to how to get your town ordinance changed to allow backyard chickens. I'm Gwen Bale and I'm founder and chair of Camden County Chickens and Therapy Hens. Here's just my hens. I actually have 8. One of them is not in the photo right now. I want to stress that I'm not an attorney. I've learned from experience and from working with my mayor and commissioners for 5 years that it took to get a pilot program in my town. And I live in Haddon Township, New Jersey, about 5 minutes from the bridge to Philadelphia. So we're going to be discussing a lot of things over the next hour or so, such as how, when, and why the current laws were adopted, finding out what your law actually says, using E-code 360 / and it would be here, New Jersey / Haddon Township. What's zoning all about? How to get your hens legalized versus getting a variance, and the problem with just doing it. Some additional topics, we'll talk about homeowners associations, getting your grassroots movement started, pilot programs versus actual ordinances, town councils, gathering materials to share with councils, writing your proposed pilot or ordinance, and steps a proposed ordinance must follow in your town. So in the past, raising chickens was encouraged. A lot of you probably have seen the handout on the left where it said Uncle Sam expects you to keep hens and raise chickens. And that was from around the First World War. They really encouraged everybody to have a couple hens in order to help feed your family. And on the left is a famous picture of Shirley Temple with a chicken from a movie from way, way back. And here's even a magazine with Uncle Sam and some chickens on the front from 1917, because this is just how life was back then. But then we decided we all wanted communities that look like this, the little houses with the picket fences and neighborhoods. And farming and farmers were really looked down upon. Everything was, oh, it's going to stink and everything else. So then they started writing laws that banned backyard chickens or any chickens. Generally, that started after World War II, about the early 1950s, where we started seeing these ordinances pop up. So first of all, if you're not sure, and I guess you must be pretty sure it's illegal, but if not, be sure it's legal in your community. And E-code 360 is a very, very valuable tool. As I said in the introduction, you would just look up / New Jersey or whatever state and your town, and you should be able to find the laws regarding chickens. I would search under either fowl or poultry or coops. Don't just look up chicken or you'll have all the laws about Kentucky Fried Chicken and stuff like that, and not what you're looking for. But you should be able to find something. Now, it's not 100% guarantee, because sometimes they're in planning and zoning ordinances, which could be separate from your standard ones. So you may really have to do a little bit of digging. And you can certainly call your municipal building and ask them for a copy. Don't ever take anybody's word for it. If they say, no, you can't, or yes, you can, say, well, can I have a copy of what that ordinance actually says? And it should be your right to get a copy of that, whether you have to pay a few bucks or they could email you, or you may have to go to the municipal building. But you really want to see what you're up against. So there's different ways that the laws can regulate chickens. They can totally ban them. They call them livestock, farm animals, or agriculture. And actually, agriculture is a really poor term for backyard chickens, because agriculture implies you're selling the products, whether you're selling vegetables, eggs, whatever, it's considered agriculture. And most of the ordinances that have passed since we started this whole movement and got our pilot program in 2015, they banned the sale of eggs, because we want to stress that it's not agriculture, that you're having eggs for your family, and certainly you can donate eggs to your neighbors or your friends and family. Sometimes they like to give you a donation, and that would be fine towards the chicken food, but you can't sell them. And therefore, any law that says that it bans agriculture really shouldn't pertain to chickens. I mean, it actually would pertain to anything to do with growing veggies or having hens or eggs. They can also restrict it to the size of property or the distance from the chicken coop and the chicken run to the property line. Or they can restrict it to certain districts. There could be total residential ones where it's not allowed, and then other zones where it is. So we're going to look at a couple of different zones or different ordinances around here. Collingswood is our neighboring town, and their ordinance prohibits the keeping of fowl and livestock, including, and they're very specific, any chicken, turkey, goose, duck, emu, ostrich, or any fowl customarily found on a farm, and pigeons, as well as any bull, calf, heifer, sheep, llama, goat, horse, pony, or swine. So there, any of it is illegal. And now we're going to look at Morristown, which isn't far from us. And there's mentions initially keeping of horses, but every building used for keeping poultry or horses, including a barn, stable, or coop, shall be located at least 50 feet from every street line or property line. So that's pretty restrictive, actually. That's all it says. They don't have any rules about how many chickens you can have or what the coop size can be. But that can be pretty restrictive, that it has to be back 50 feet from your street and then 50 feet from your property line. I could never have chickens if it was, I had to follow this. My entire property is a little less than 7,000 square feet. And we're allowed to have up to 8 hens, no roosters. If our coop and run, I call it the complex, is at least 20 feet from the windows and doors of our contiguous neighbors, so either side and behind. It has to be at least 20 feet from the windows and doors and 10 feet from the property line. So, because that's a normal thing. So Morristown is a farming community and always has been, says their enforcement officer, Clifford. We allow chickens as long as you can meet the setback requirements for any coop, which is 50 feet from any property line. Clifford said from his experience, hens are fine, but the noise from roosters and unkept coops could be a problem. And that was from 2017. Now, Hamilton, which is down quite a ways from us, probably close to it, 45 minutes or so, has long been recognized as an agricultural community even before it was incorporated in 1866. While the growth of produce is allowed and often encouraged in backyard gardens throughout the town, and other agricultural stable livestock is only permitted in certain areas of the town, and that includes chickens. Mark Rogers, the town enforcement officer, acknowledged a growing desire among residents to own chickens, but they can't have them. They can't, that's all there is to it. This is his direct quote. People are under the impression that if it doesn't say you can't have chickens in the law, that means you can have them. Actually, it's the other way around. It has to say that you can have them, he said. Now, you might think that's kind of strange, but also a very large community near me, Cherry Hill, has the same kind of thing, where unless the law says you can do something, it means you can't. And it's been a very difficult thing. I've met with their group. We went to many, many meetings, and we went and spoke with the previous mayor, and they're getting their second mayor since then. And basically, finally, they decided they would turn their head and look the other way unless there was a complaint. So if you have a neighbor next door who even just doesn't like the idea you have chickens, it doesn't mean that you have loud chickens or roosters or you're not keeping things clean. They can just complain that you're illegal because there is nothing in their law that says that you may have chickens, and they can make you get rid of them. So you're constantly living with that looking over your shoulder to see if anybody's going to report you. And you then do have to have your chickens rehomed. And that's really a shame. And it's very, very difficult to tell these residents, they just don't understand that. And Hamilton is the same way. And I'm sure that there's some other towns, but this has been a really big thing in our area. So back to the Mr. Rogers, and it's a kind of Mr. Rogers we used to watch on TV. While this chapter is silent as to an allowance of a use in a zone district, such silence shall be interpreted to mean that the use is not permitted. A use is not permitted in any zone district of the town unless specifically included as a use or category of use in this chapter and in a specific zone district, the code says. That's what everybody has to understand. There's nothing in the code that says you cannot have chickens. It doesn't work that way. He said that chickens are only allowed in the agricultural production, AP, and rural residential zones, provided that the lot size in the latter is 5 acres or greater. This big lot size really, really bothers me. I mean, people don't have to have 5 acres to live. Why would 4 hens have to have 5 acres to have them? It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And on that, there are 2 towns that have changed their laws that were really pretty exciting, because laws on chicken ownership varied from town to town. Counties aren't involved. I'd love for Camden County to even issue a resolution attesting to the value of having backyard hens as maybe a way to kind of help the ones move along and change ordinances that have been very reluctant to do that. And certainly there's no state law, there's no national law. Often that one cartoon that I showed you, or poster from way back where Uncle Sam wants you to have chickens, I've seen on backyard chicken pages, people post that and say, look, the United States government says you can have chickens. No, it does not. Everything is by town, not by county, state, or the national government. So in Voorhees, which is a pretty upscale town around here, the old ordinance said the residents needed to have 5 acres. And now there's no property size, and they're actually using the same law with how you place your coop and your run to be at least 20 feet from the neighbor's windows and doors. So they pretty much copied the Haddon Township ordinance. And Deptford was the biggie. Deptford used to require 30, yes, 30 acres to allow chickens, which is absurd. I mean, they were definitely making sure that they were huge farms, which of course, the bigger the farm, the more problem there can be with odor and everything. But now they also use the same law, including a 10-foot setback from the property line as we do. So they were 2 pretty big coups, especially the Deptford Township one. Now, homeowners associations, or HOAs, I just want to briefly mention them. I've only come in contact with it twice since I've been involved with chicken legalization. It's very important to know that in general, the rules of the HOA supersede the ordinances of the town, which means even if you live in a town where the town has been progressive and changed their law and made it like a lot of the backyard chicken ordinances are, if the HOA is in that town, they do not have to follow what the town says. The rules of the HOA come first, and that's a really biggie. And we did see that happen in Delanco, which is in Burlington County, and probably about 20 minutes or 25 minutes from me, where somebody from an HOA did know that the town changed the law. So she started the preparations to be getting chickens, and then was told, nope, you know, our law says no chickens. So you have to be careful with that. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't appeal to their HOA, but you'd have to be just as prepared to approach the board with all the handouts, with knowing everything that you need to know to be able to get your point across about this. That the same amount of effort that the group went through when I worked with them to get the law changed in Delanco. So, or Delran, I'm sorry, I meant to say Delran before. So all the things about changing a town's ordinance does still apply, and you'd have to get the HOA to change that as well. Now, zoning was really not even an issue until the beginning of the 20th century. There were no zoning boards and whatever. They decided to start protecting homeowners from the devaluation from like big trucks and going through residential areas all the time, and the noise and whatever would make the housing values go down. So they started creating zoning ordinances. And if a zoning ordinance doesn't say you can do something in a residential area, you cannot, as I mentioned earlier. You really have to try to find out if there are specific zoning ordinances and not just your standard town list of ordinances. But prior to zoning, not only did we not have to ask permission, we were actually expected to raise chickens to feed our family. So ways to have chickens if it is illegal in your town: change the law or get a pilot program passed, and it takes time. Like I said, it took 5 years here. I went to my council and had the information. I had taken some classes. I knew the answers to questions they asked. And I really believe initially it was a procrastination thing on their part. They wanted to punt it around to see whether I was still going to stay with it and see what kind of perseverance I had. And they didn't know who they were up against. So initially, they sent it to the Planning and Zoning Board, and they kept it for a year and just basically checked out what other towns were doing. And certainly there were way more towns where chickens were either totally banned or had all these huge areas they had to have in property areas and size. And they kept it, and they came back to council and actually voted against it 7-1, that this was not necessary, that our yards were too small, yada, yada. They also sent it to the Environmental Commission, and I actually became an environmental commissioner. And we discussed it, and it was the same thing for another whole year. They would come up with questions at every single meeting. I'd have the answers. We'd go back and forth. And there were several members of the Environmental Council Commission that were really against this. They could just not see any use whatsoever in having backyard chickens. But finally, we came to the consensus and sent a report back to the mayor saying that there was no negative environmental impact, and that our yards were big enough, and that we could create a ordinance that would take the yard size in account for how many hens anyone could have. And, that was fine. So all this plus the time, I took some time in the middle off to do more studying and to get my grassroots group going, because I did learn from one member of the Environmental Council Commission that they're not going to change a law for one person. So I needed to have a group, and you need to have a group, and we'll talk a lot about that. It costs money. People don't realize how much money that it actually costs to change a law. I never could find the exact amount, but some of the things involved are you come up with a sample ordinance for either a pilot or a full-blown ordinance, which I'll mention in a minute. Their town solicitor gets paid to review the whole thing, to make sure all the legalese in it is appropriate and follows the norms in the town. It has to be publicized in whatever the town's newspaper of record is. That's expensive. And so it goes on in order for them to actually create an ordinance of any kind. So to do that for one person, and we have about 15,000 residents here, it would never happen. They're not going to spend that kind of money. Of course, this was pre-pandemic. As I said, we got our first pilot program passed in August of 2015. I started this with my green team that lost interest back in 2010. And it was pre-pandemic, and we all know the situation since the pandemic that towns are suffering. They lost a lot of money doing what they had to do for the pandemic, and they're still just about catching up in some respects. So they're not going to spend the money for you unless you have more than one person. So your option is to either change the law and that takes time, or get a variance, which can cost up to several $1,000s. Now, I did want to describe the pilots versus the full ordinance. When I presented to my council, I was actually very nervous about the idea of a pilot program because I didn't want to invest. I'm 75 years old, so even then I was 70. Didn't want to invest in a good coop and run that would withstand a windstorm and whatever, and fall in love with my hens because they're like pets to me. All to have, somebody or some people in our group screw it up and then they cancel the pilot or don't renew it and everybody has to get rid of their hens. And I discussed this privately with the mayor and he had some good suggestions which will come up in the course of the class. But I did become a little bit more turned around about the whole thing and it was okay. But here we go with the money. To even get a pilot program passed, which is a trial, if that's the case, I suggest you aim for a 2-year pilot. Talk about that more later too. I didn't know any better. I was a nurse for 40 years. I'm not an attorney, as I said. I just thought, oh, good, a year will be fine. Then they'll see we're doing it fine, and then we'll have an ordinance. Well, the only thing that happened from the planning board was they had some recommendations when they knew that we were going to be able to pass this. And it really wasn't, to me, very good at all. Just the size of the coop was so small in the regulations that you knew you couldn't have more than 4 hens ever. Besides the coop and the run together had to be 80 square feet or less. That's just about for 4 hens. And it could only be 5.5 feet tall, which means even most women in the pilot couldn't walk into a walk-in run without having to duck. So they want us to keep it clean, but they don't want to give us enough access. So it really left a few things that we were very unhappy with. But in the course of it, we knew that we could try to amend that. So we had it for a year and we were ready to do more. And they decided when we said, hey, can we try this? Well, we had so much opposition. So let's make the changes that you want. We wanted to make it so that the first year you could have 4 hens, just in case you didn't like it. And then we had to kind of help you rehome your hens. But after the first year, you could go up to however many chickens we decided to cap it at, which here is 8. We also wanted, therefore, and this was a good point for us, we had to change the size of the coop. So what we have now is the coop can be 100 square feet, which is way more than anybody would ever have because the most we can have are 8 hens. But it was easier for them because that's the size of a shed here, can be up to 100 square feet without a variance. We also got it extended that it could be 6.5 feet tall instead of 5.5 feet tall, which let us have the other amount of hens. Now, there are a couple towns or houses in our town where their yards are small and they really can never have more than 4 hens because they can't make it big enough and fit within the criteria. So there were a few negatives, but very rare. But because we had had such opposition when we passed the pilot the first time, it was like a wedding. One whole side of the courtroom was pro-chicken and the other whole side was anti-chicken, and they were coming up with reasons not to have chickens that would blow your mind. Like everybody in town would have to have a tetanus shot every 6 months if you were around chickens, which is absurd. It's 10 years and most people were not going to be getting chickens. So the mayor agreed to all of our proposal, but said just because we had so much opposition, let's keep the pilot another year. And we wound up having a 3-year pilot and getting every single thing we wanted, and it's worked out. Right now we have 27 houses, I believe, with backyard hens, and the most successful program. It's really been the gold standard. So that's the thing. You have to create an ordinance to make a pilot. Then the next year they have to create another ordinance to extend the pilot. So in the course of that, it's costing more and more money. And the same thing with variances. They can be a few hundred to a few $1,000s. And they're normally handled by the planning and zoning board of the town. And as I said, from a couple hundred to a couple $1,000s. All your neighbors within a certain distance has to be notified that you're going to have chickens, and they can attend the hearing and address the board. And they may be people that really don't want to learn anything. All they do is remember the old days going down the country and smelling the chicken houses, that it's all going to stink. It's going to bring rodents to your house. It's going to be a real eyesore. And you could provide them with all the literature in the world. And just like in some other cases, they're not going to change their mind. So they can go and attend and say all these things to the planning board. You normally need some really detailed drawings of your property, the coop and the run. Some people would actually have to get like an architect to kind of make sure it's all exactly right. And the thing is, if you get the variance and then you move to the other side of town, get a bigger house or whatever, you got to start over again, because a variance stays with the property. So the next person who buys your house already has a variance to have chickens, but you go 2 blocks away to get a bigger house and you got to start over. Plus, if you're declined, and they certainly do that, they'll say, no, I don't think your yard's big enough, or we don't want to have chickens and blah, blah. They don't have to give you back your fees, because they've put their money and effort into their solicitor and all the whatever quote research they've done. So you may get a very small part of the money back. So if you're going to spend $1,000, you'd be lucky maybe to get a couple $100 back and not get chickens. So what about illegal chickens? People say, well, we'll just do it. Well, if you're on any of the Facebook pages about chickens, and believe me, the calls I get is people do report you. You're going to have that person that, for whatever reason, they just don't like you. And therefore, this is one more thing. Certainly, it's nice if you have friendly neighbors, you offer them some free eggs and whatever. And most people really, once they realize that they're relatively quiet, the hens do make more noise right after they lay an egg, but it lasts a few seconds. And, but you just have to take that chance. And like I said, that was not a chance that I would really want to be doing, because they can have fines. They can give you a week or two to rehome your hens, making it almost impossible. And then if they're not gone by such and so day, they start charging you a lot of money for fines. And not everybody's as fortunate to be able to just move their chickens. I mean, ideally, that's why you should fix this before you have chickens, because it's very difficult. There is something that you can try if you go and speak to your council or whatever. If you're legitimately working on trying to change your law, like I hope some of you are, then perhaps they would give you the slack to keep the chickens while we work on this. That did happen. We were successful with that in Woodbury in Gloucester County, where she was allowed to keep her hens for as long as it took council to review everything. They came up with a pilot. They also got an ordinance. So she didn't have to rehome them. But that is really unusual. Usually you do, and then either you can get them back, or you start a new flock if you're successful, but it's tough. I'm not going to go through reading all these, but you'll have them if you want to look back. These are all the towns, almost all I worked with. We didn't know our neighboring town of Barrington was working on it. They got their ordinance 3 months before we did. Actually, to be honest, don't like their ordinance. And then we had our pilot, and then Woodbury, and the list goes on. And you'll see in the beginning, most towns did create pilot programs because they were nervous. They didn't know if this was going to work. They didn't want an ordinance that then they'd have to get rid of the ordinance. They thought, well, the pilot, we can extend it. Or, we probably give them the year, and if it's not working, blah, blah. The best part, and I can't wait to tell you this, that every single pilot, except one, which I'll get into, has progressed and is now an ordinance. So you can start to see more ordinances because we did that work for you. We've proven that ordinances work, that there aren't problems, that there's not complaints, that nobody has taken that the pilot, nobody has had such an issue that it never did anything. The only one that is an issue, and this also brings up some important points, is Monroe Township in Gloucester County. When we first approached council, we had a really good group down there, and I'd worked with them. We had some meetings and everything. The mayor particularly was so anti-chicken. He said, oh my goodness, that you're going to take money from the Acme because people won't be buying eggs there. This is how absurd it was. The meeting was like unbelievable. And then the next time they had an election, quite a few new people were elected to the council. So we had another meeting or two, presented it. It got passed as a pilot program, a 2-year pilot. They have not had any problems. But in the 2 years of the pilot, it changed back. The council became the same political party that was running it when we couldn't get anything done. So even though they have a successful pilot, I think it kind of is like Washington. They don't want to acknowledge the fact that the other party created a really good pilot that should be an ordinance. So everybody's still allowed to get chickens, but they have never done anything to either make another year of the pilot or create it into an ordinance, which I don't think will happen unless it flips back again. So that's how ridiculous that politics can get into this. The pilot program is supposed to prove it works, that it's going to not cause complaints, that everybody's doing it right. And we do it right because we work hard for this. And we don't want somebody in the program that's going to screw it up for everybody else. And we'll be talking about resident run programs, which is what we have here in a few minutes. But anyway, that's the only town that has not converted to ordinance, and there's no reason for it except politics. And you can see that the most recent one was in West Hampton in Burlington County. Some of these are a little further apart, couple actually in Pennsylvania. So I really say this is like the Delaware Valley. But the other two really interesting ones, because we hear it and we've now created ordinances and pilots in every type of community that you can think of. As I mentioned, Delran had an ordinance if you had a farm. So we didn't need to bother with the farmers. They're doing their thing. They're under the right to farm. If they're getting rid of waste the way they're supposed to, no big deal. We just want to deal with the backyard chickens in the suburbs. So we've had big communities in size. We also, Voorhees that I mentioned, they're a fairly wealthy community. They had a law, I think it was five acres, and they got rid of that and did what we're doing. We've done small towns. Oakland next to us has less than 5,000 people. They were the first one to just absolutely skip the pilot and go straight to ordinance, and they've been very successful. And we've had every kind of demographic, including wealthy towns. Around here, Haddonfield is pretty much the most wealthy town in the area, and they created an ordinance. Next to Haddonfield is a tiny little country club town called Tavistock with about 8 or 9 houses. And they were part of Haddonfield. Haddonfield was a dry town with the blue laws for years and years and years. And they wanted a country club in Tavistock. So they had to break away because of the liquor laws. So they are even more of a wealthy community of 8 or 9 houses, multi-million-dollar houses, and you can have chickens in Tavistock. So, we've proven that it works regardless of acreage and mileage. Some of these real huge townships, it's worked versus very tiny towns. So there's absolutely no reason why it can't work in whatever town you're coming from. So on to growing your grassroots movement. As I said, first of all, you can't do this by yourself because not only is it a lot of effort, a lot of time, but it also is not going to be very promising for them to change the law for you. So some things that you can do first is connect with your green team. I did that. And oh yeah, this is great. And we had every month at the meeting, we bring it up. And then all of a sudden, it's like, they didn't want to spend the time and the effort. We don't even have a green team now. We haven't for a couple of years. I belong to the green team in Oak Glen, the little town with 5,000 people instead of 15,000 people, because we have a very active green team. You can contact your community garden. Most times they're into it. Chicken poop can be great fertilizer as long as it's composted for a while so that it's not such a hot thing that's going to burn your plants. Sometimes you can get help from them. And depending, as I had talked about, your environmental commission, it can be pro or con. But there are places that you might be able to get some help and get things moving. Go to a meeting of those groups. See whether, you're new, you've never been there. You ask if you can speak for a couple minutes. Tell them that you're interested in changing the law, bring a few handouts, whatever, and see whether you can get support of the group, because that can be a really big help. You can kind of dovetail everything with that particular group and be involved in their activities. So if they're going to do something on composting, maybe you could have a table with even somebody's chicken. That I used to take my hens everywhere, so that you can talk. Sure, this is what you can also do, is collect the chicken poop and compost it. So you can kind of share events and get the word out more. I would suggest that you do take a chicken class. I mean, I currently am not teaching the chicken class anymore. The vice chair of Camden County Chickens, Jacqueline Ritchie, has taken that part over for me, predominantly because of my husband's health. He had a brain shunt. He still has many, many issues. And it's just too difficult to schedule classes or whatever and then have to cancel them because we're having issues, medical issues here. So she's taking care of everything. But you can email me and I forward the information. And she's doing a couple in-person classes in the area over the next few months. And she also has my PowerPoint from my basic class, as well as I did do a Zoom class. And if somebody wants to just review or watch the Zoom class on that, that's available. But I do think the more information you have, because if you're going to stumble or go when they ask you something, they may not have as much confidence in you to help you on your journey. Also go to your town council meetings, kind of incognito. I mean, you don't have to tell them why you're there. You don't have to say anything. Don't wear any chicken shirts or anything, just kind of go and scope it out. You can learn a lot. Okay. In a lot of towns, some of them are very, both parties, and you can always see one party votes this and one party votes that. Other ones, there's towns around here where they always agree. Like whoever's the mayor, the ones under him or her, I don't know whether they just agree or the fact that they don't want to disagree. So you have to kind of get a feel for what they're doing and how they vote. Maybe you can see by what they're talking about and what their votes are on certain environmental issues. Are they progressive? And whatever, so that you know how much work it might be trying to convince them. Also go online, look up your town. Wikipedia is really good for that. They'll have the list of everybody. They'll say when their terms are up, what party they are. Because if you get the feel that this group isn't going to be very helpful, then it may be worth it to you to do more background work, get more people, learn more, and wait and see what the election brings. And hopefully vote in people that you think, based on biographies, that would be helpful for your group. So always know when the elections are, how many of them get reelected, how often, what's the setup there. So do your homework, because it's going to pay off in the long run. And if you can get up to 6 people that are on your wavelength with passion, that you can divvy up jobs, that you check out the council people in their election, I'm going to check out this, or whatever, it can be helpful. And get out there. This is me. Way back, before we got our pilot, I would go to our farmer's market. We had a tiny smart farmer's market, but well attended every single week with the sign, backyard hens, no roosters, sign our petition, blah, blah. And, you know, didn't even have a chicken. I'd have a stuffed toy chicken sitting on the table until the last one before we actually were going to get our pilot. Somebody from another town where it was legal actually brought a real chicken, and everybody loves to see real chicken. So if you have a friend that has a chicken that would be able to take it to an event you're participating in, it really helps to have a live chicken there that they can see, they don't smell, that they're not making a lot of noise, and it really can help. And get out in your community. So on the left, this was Woodbury. And you can see I brought a chicken and somebody else brought a chicken too. And we had our sign up. They created their logo was Woodbury Chicken Whisperers for some reason. And we have information about their program, and we have a blast. On the other side, you can see it was during the pandemic, and that was the Haddonfield leader and her kids, and we had to wear masks, but we had one of our hens with us, and actually two. I have one in my lap, plus one in the cage. And we got the ordinance passed in Haddonfield. So have handouts to give out, or ideally on display with QR codes. I mean, we're all trying to save paper here and help the environment. So come up with one, make copies, or make some stand-up kind of copies that people can take QR code pictures. The 7 myths of backyard hens. When I send you the link to this class, that should have come with the link because it's a really good one. I'm allowed to use it. It was the place that I took several classes from online, pre-Zoom. They were very, very, very interesting, very expensive. And then ideally create a handout appropriate for your town. And that includes the benefits. And I'm going to show you, because I have permission from Donna, what Haddonfield did. So her one page was why bring hens to Haddonfield? Higher quality eggs, all the stuff you know, educational, therapeutic value, waste reduction, pest control, soil enrichment, and companionship with an animal that helps us as well as the environment. And their name is Haddonfield hens. So this was on a paper. And then she had some of the myths. She put the ones that made it concise. So she used 3 of them about smell, noise, and avian flu, which are really the 3 big issues that come up. And a 40-pound dog creates more waste than 10 hens. Unlike dog waste, of course, chicken waste can be composted, and chickens themselves do not smell. They're noisy. Well, fact is, at their loudest, they're about as loud as human conversation. So if you and I were having this chat in my backyard, the neighbors on either side might know that somebody's in my yard talking to me, but they probably can't even hear what we're saying. And we do know of a lot of places that there have been chickens next door and neighbors never even knew they were there. And about avian flu. It is extremely rare in backyard flocks of only hens and no waterfowl. Okay, so the few cases that happened around, one was in Monmouth County, and they had both ducks and chickens. So the waterfowl seems to be the biggest culprit for this. But if then your backyard birds, your little sparrows, are walking where there's goose poop, then they really truly can possibly bring it to your yard. So you do have to be careful. And there's a section in my basic class about biosecurity and being aware of avian flu. But until the other day, when somebody got avian flu from a cow, I think in California, there had been no risk of avian flu strictly from birds, and that's what we're concerned about. But now we're hearing, oh, we shouldn't have hens because we're all going to get they're all going to get avian flu or salmonella. That was the biggie a few years ago, and hand washing and all that helps about all that stuff. So anyway, you have to make sure that you get rid of some of people's myths. This is another paper, something like this. There's a lot of stuff that you can find online. What they do, they convert 10 pounds of food waste into eggs, essentially. They fertilize. They mulch for you, they do work on your garden for you, they eat a lot of insects so that they can see there's more value than just getting your eggs, which of course is wonderful. Then they also had a section on their pilot program. But of course, we actually didn't get a pilot, we actually got an ordinance. So in the beginning, we were talking about a pilot because we didn't think the town would go for it. So a pilot would be a trial allowing up to 30 residents to own backyard hens, no roosters. Small charming coops, again, the same rule, 20 feet from the neighbor's windows and doors. Up to 4 quiet, easy to care for hens, a class required. And I'd say of all the ones that you saw on that list, probably 60% require a class, which I think is critical. And I really think you should try to have a class included. It really weeds out people. It's not designed to be overwhelming, but to tell you the truth about things, what things cost, what kind of preparations you have to do to predator proof it, not only for the sake of your birds, but keeping them in your yard. And some people decide it's just not for them, or maybe it's not for them now because they have a young baby or whatever. So maybe they'll wait a while. And they're the people you don't want in your program. So not only does everybody learn something, my class is 2.5 hours. Winter care, summer care, medical issues, what should be in your medical bag for chickens that you have on hand, also let alone the predator proofing and the breeds and whatever. I really believe deep in my heart, and not because I taught the class, I do believe that the more you know, the better the programs will be. And then she also mentions the few towns around here who all have successful chicken programs, either a pilot or an ordinance. She came up with some, sorry, they're not the best copies, Haddonfield hens, and some are, so you get their information. You're at a tabling event with all your stuff. You want them and you want to help change the ordinance. And the other one just is, I don't want chickens myself, but I support my neighbors and I do think that a chicken ordinance should be passed. It's really nice to be able to have that. Now, one other thing though about that, my mayor told me in the beginning when I had discussed things with him, he doesn't put too much confidence in petitions. Your list of people that are helping you, that's for you. That's not for anything. But he feels that sometimes people are intimidated. So if you're at the farmer's market and, I have a petition here, and if you just even support the idea, they may see it and think, oh, I don't want to hurt her feelings, or look, she's got her kids with her. And so is it true? Is it real or not? I know I had some people in the past when I was at the market that would say, no, I don't agree with it. And so I don't want to sign the petition. And that's fine. They're being honest. But he said personally, he'd rather people send him emails in those days, way back when, or send him a letter and say, I support backyard chickens. But, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt to have it. And maybe your mayor doesn't feel the same way or whatever. I think it's something to try. Okay, so now you have your group. You've managed to get your 6 people or so. So what are you going to do? Well, first of all, you want to find out if anybody in the group personally knows a council member. Okay, maybe they do. Maybe they're friends or relatives or whatever. See if they'll be willing to set up a short private meeting just to discuss the whole issue and your goal to be allowed to have backyard hens. And maybe in some cases, somebody else from your group could participate too. So that there's 2 of you, maybe that would help only because you'd know, hey, there's more than one person out here. Take some handouts and a copy of the ordinance you'd like to propose. So there's sample ordinances. I'm going to talk about the chicken legalization page and whatever. And, if you can come up even with the bare bones of what things you like in ordinances or pilot programs, so to be able to just discuss it. If you don't have the capability or you're nervous about that, just put things like a required class for hens the first year, what you want to say about the coop, the whole idea of not using yard size, but where the coop and run complex is compared to the neighbors, that kind of thing. Just the topics even that you'd like to see. See if that member can give you any insight on how to best proceed, such as a meeting with another member. So you've had your meeting, it seems successful, then see whether they can say, well, answer your question. What do I do now? Do you have somebody else I should talk to? How do I progress? What's the next step in your opinion? And ask how to get on the town's council agenda, okay? Because this is a thing. I mean, most times we'll talk about a little more, but most times every single council meeting, regular council meeting, the general public gets probably 5 minutes during what's called public portion. So even if you're not on the agenda for some reason, you could stand up and say, I'd like to have a pilot program or an ordinance passed to allow 4 backyard hens, blah, blah. But it's better to be on the agenda because theoretically then in some towns, you don't have a limit, and I wouldn't abuse that. I'd still try to keep it to 5 to 10 minutes. And if you can bring other people from your group as well, be organized. Okay, I'm going to talk about the benefits. You're going to talk about the myths and why people would say that they don't want chickens because they don't know the difference, and whatever. Divvy it up. So you don't want to be repetitious, taking up their time. And so sometimes you can just request it through the municipal clerk. You call them and you say, I'd like to be on the agenda to bring up the topic of backyard chickens. And whether that person has to consult with council or not, who puts you on the agenda, because that can be very different. Now, a lot of towns have 2 separate meetings. Camden County for sure. They have what's called a caucus meeting. It's usually a week or 2 before the big meeting. And sometimes there's public portion at the caucus meeting in some towns, and in some towns there isn't. And the caucus meeting is they're going to review everything that they need to discuss at the big meeting. What resolutions are going to be voted on, what ordinances are going to be voted on. Is it the first reading or second reading? We'll talk about that. And just to get their ducks in a row or chickens in a row. They have a meeting to set up. It's usually not real long unless they have something they're really debating before they put it on the agenda for the real meeting. Some towns you can talk there. Okay, my town was very, very wonderful to work with. I could talk at caucus meetings, council meetings. They never limited me. I have towns where they hit a button on the clock and they'll say 5 minutes is up, and boom, you're done. There's another town that said if more than 2 people talk about the same topic, they won't let anybody else do it. And that same town, and by the way, they just changed their law from 5 acres to 1 acre. So the poor woman who was trying to keep her chickens has 3/4 of an acre, so technically lost. But they have a total of 30 minutes for public comment. And it doesn't matter how many interesting comments and all different comments, 30 minutes, you're done. Never heard that before. Public comment could be 2 hours if there was a lot of stuff in the agenda that needed to be discussed. So anyway, find out how you get to bring up the chicken ordinance and when you can get on the agenda. And be sure if you're talking to them and they say, wait, we'll put you on the agenda next month. If you don't think you're ready, then you have to say, well, I just wanted to get the groundwork going here. I probably wouldn't be ready until, well, next month is May here, but I won't be ready till September. And just so that, they're all on the same page, because you want to be certainly want to be prepared when you do your presentation. Again, how do you get on the agenda? When you're on the agenda, a week or so before, you want to send a packet and keep it relatively small. Most people on councils also have full-time jobs working. They're not 100% council people that have nothing else to do. You don't want to give them 100 pages to read and expect them to do it. So keep it to the important things, and to find out how to verify that you're on the agenda and how to disperse these to the other council meetings. And some towns have council administrators that are not elected members, but they should still get one too. Should you just send it all to the municipal clerk and they disperse it? Should you email it to each person on council? What will make this easier? No matter what, you ask that it be put high priority or high importance, because you're going to be discussing it at the next meeting, so that they know this is something that they ideally will read, and be sure that some of them will not be reading it. But at least you've given them ample time. And once again, mobilize your troops, at least a few members. Ideally, you don't want to tire them out, and there's certain times that it can be more valuable than others to have some of your group there. Now, some things your group needs to decide. Again, talk about, does anybody have a contact on council? Now, here's the biggie. Do any of them already have chickens, illegal or legal? Okay, residents with illegal chickens can still be a big help to you, but you really have to stress to them that you're not going to out them. If they've been doing it fine, they haven't had complaints, and they've been under the radar, you don't want to have them come and say something, and then somebody says, I know that person, and they live next door to me, and they have chickens. But they can give you a lot of input. So you want to ask them things. Well, like, how many do you have? Tell me about your coop. You want to try to see as many things that you can work into your proposed ordinance that would let them just slide into it. In a lot of cases, that doesn't work. One town that I worked with, the mayor knew that there were 3 houses with quote illegal chickens. They were all doing it fine. They gave us a lot of input, and now they're all part of the Backyard Chicken Advisory Board, which was pretty interesting that that's the way it happened. But nobody got grandfathered in. They all had to take the class. They all had to have an inspection of the coop and whatever, make sure it's where it belongs, so that they were doing the same thing as everybody else. But they can give you a lot of good information by doing that. Also, maybe they are legal. Maybe they do have 5 acres, but you're not working for that. You're working to get it in the smaller neighborhoods, but that doesn't mean they have to do everything that, like I said, like the farmers, they don't have to take the class, but they can still be a help. Or maybe they have previous experience. Maybe they live somewhere where they had chickens legally, and a couple times it's happened, like, I was legal in my town and I bought a house in blah, blah, and now it's not legal, and what can we do, and blah, blah. Or maybe they had them growing up, or their grandmother had chickens, you can get some extra help from that. Anybody that has specific skills with legal stuff, if you can have an attorney on your group that wants chickens. We were lucky that we had an attorney that wanted chickens. But that can be a big helper and kind of give you some help in how you write it up and all that. Or just even graphic stuff in IT, so that you can divvy up some of the jobs. Decide whether you want the ordinance or a pilot. I did mention this. If you're getting vibes from the town that they're not real thrilled about this, then that might be a chance for you to get it if you have a pilot. If they know they have that way out, that after 2 years, if you've had problems, if it's really bad problems, they could stop at any time. But maybe show that as a way of a compromise. You'd prefer an ordinance, but again, we've passed all these pilots and they've worked and they've become ordinances. So why reinvent the wheel? Okay, but maybe over getting nothing, you're willing to go for a pilot program. That's got to be your group decision. Now, the benefits of a citizen-run backyard chicken program. This is really interesting because this was my mayor's idea. This again, pre-COVID, but he's always interested in saving money. And he was used to having the environmental commission that was doing a lot of work in that respect. And so he brought up the fact that why not have a group of people, most of which would have chickens. We did have a couple people that were on our board that were wonderful, and they took the class, but they just couldn't do it themselves, and they wanted to be able to help other people. But most of the people that became our Backyard Chicken Advisory Board, some had backyard experience, relative experience and whatnot. But the thing is that we run our program. We have a meeting, in the beginning, we met once a month till we got everything off the ground. Now we meet twice a year, in April and October, to review how many towns, what's going on. And we certainly have a lot of emails in between. We came up with a really great packet of information for new people on the board. Our other jobs are that here you have to have a site visit. You take the class first, and then if you still want to proceed, then you let us know, and you have a site visit and you show us where you're going to put your coop. We take our measuring tape just in case it's small and we have to worry about where you're putting the coop in relationship to the ordinance. And it gives us a chance to meet people and know there isn't any problems. There was all this, oh my God, are they going to let me in? Well, you're not going to get chickens if you don't have a site visit. But everybody knows everybody. We have a Facebook page. We'll talk about that. But we post our pictures so everybody knows who's really on the board. And we're in a community where we're lucky in that people know their neighbors or, believe that we're there for the right purposes. And it works. So that's something to think about. But if there's a problem, and we've been very, very lucky, we haven't had problems. But say somebody complained about smell. Well, who do you want to come out and check your coop? The code enforcement officer who knows nothing about chickens. I invited our code enforcement officer when we got the program, and she said, nope, sure thing. So, they don't even really want to be involved. But you want them coming out and saying, yep, it stinks, you have 2 weeks to fix it. I'm a nurse, I'm an educator. I was an educator of nurses my life. And, if I went out and there was a coop that smelled, I'm going to talk about, well, what do you use for filler? How often are you cleaning it? Let's talk about this, that, and the other. So you're going to help them. You're going to give them suggestions. And therefore, then you say, and I have to come back in, our law says 4 weeks. Sometimes we go sooner. We could make the decision to go sooner. We have a form we fill out, copies go to the clerk and all the, if there was a problem, and the council members, so they know what we did. So the only time we have to involve someone from the town is if we would go back, say again, for the stinky coop, and in 4 weeks, whatever, we go and it still stinks. We have no legal authority. We can't say you didn't do it, you're getting rid of your chickens. We call the code enforcement person then, and then they deal with it. So, I just think it's so much better. We could handle just about everything. The only thing the clerk does that they send in their application, costs $10 a year here for the entire flock, not per chicken. And they get their license, and then she sends a copy of their form to the chair of our program. And beyond that, the town's not involved in any of it. So it saves them money. And it's just been so wonderful. And again, I'd say maybe 50% of the towns did agree with us, and that's what happens, and they're working fine. The other ones, could be the enforcement officer, somebody from the planning board, how often they're going to go visit coops. Believe me, if there's a problem, they're going to let you know because they're going to report you. So I don't see any benefit in just having somebody do an annual exam of your yard or whatever. It just doesn't make sense. It's a waste of time. So that's what the backyard chicken program, citizen run, is. Review other town ordinances and see which ones you prefer and what you'd like and don't like. The best time to be on council agenda is from March to September. Okay, because January they're doing their reorganization, February they're doing all their budget stuff. March is great. If you can have stuff in the summer, not everybody goes to council meetings in the summer. We were lucky and got our first reading in July and our second reading in August. I don't think that it hurt. We did have people show up, but not always. So the rest of the time, then you're involved with all the holidays and they move meetings around. So if you can be on the agenda from March to September, it's great. Again, I talked about public comment and whether you're going to get 5 minutes or more time. And then I am the administrator of the Chicken Legalization Leaders Facebook group. It was started by my friend Maureen Breen, who is the chair of Philadelphia Backyard Chickens. Interesting story, only Philly and Detroit They're the only major cities in the US where chickens are illegal. And Maureen's been working on it longer than I had. So she was already involved at least a couple years before I got involved. And they still haven't had any luck really changing anything because it's such a huge city at this point. But I do most of the posting on there. There's great information. There's great files. A lot of ordinances are posted, whether they're pilots or regular ordinances. You can ask questions, all kinds of stuff. And they're people from the Delaware Valley, most of which, of course, are from Jersey because they're people I come in contact with through our website, which I'm deciding whether I'm going to keep up the website. But I have been fortunate enough to be on national CBS News online edition. So I have accumulated a lot of people contacting me from the work that I've done. And up to this point, I've helped 32 towns of the list that you have help change their ordinance. Lost in a few towns. Again, the one we won the second time around. Periodically, one of the other ones that declined doing anything. Their story was they had a capability of doing it by variance. Of course, no one ever did because of the money. And they decided not to vote for it. And we actually had a veterinarian in town from Morristown with chickens, and he owned the vet practice in town. He came. We had another vet from Delran. She came to talk all about the benefits and that there's no problem with all these things that people are so worried about. We had one of the councilmen from Oak Lynn showed up because the program's been so successful. So we pulled out every important person we could think of. And I still think that's a good idea if you have friends that are veterinarians and all. And we still lost. So I think altogether I've lost 4 or 5 times, but 32 is not too bad. So if you want to look at chicken legalization leaders, let me know, and then I can add you to the group. My email is on here, or you could message me on Facebook, but I really am not crazy about Facebook messaging. And here we go with Facebook and social media. You can set up a Facebook page or social media group about backyard chickens with some kind of titles. I mentioned ours, actually, we included Oak Lynn because they're such a small town. I think they have 5 or 6 families with chickens. So they're included. Haddonfield Hens, Voorhees Chicken Nation. Kind of neat if you come up with a cute title. And but they also give you the opportunity to ask questions to the person that wants to be on your page, so you can kind of get a feel. If you're not already a member of your town Facebook page, go on it and just search for chickens or poultry or whatever, but probably chickens. You can kind of see if people are complaining about chickens or, hey, I wonder why we don't have chickens allowed here. You can get maybe a feel if you go back over some of the posts. And you can post on there that you're trying to get the ordinance changed, but be prepared. There's always going to be negative, misinformed people. When we were working on ours, we had 2 town forums that we set up, like at the library, and a friend brought chicken or chickens. And we just basically talked about the pros and, tried to convince people that no, this wasn't going to happen and no, there wouldn't be roosters. I think we had 3 or 4 at one, and they all wanted chickens. They just came to hear what we were doing because they wanted chickens. We never had anybody come that was against chickens. I mean, we were ready in case we had to debate them, but they don't want to learn. That's the point. So that's what happens sometimes with the Facebook pages, oh, well, I knew because I was on that farm and it was awful that you're going to be able to get you're going to hit all kinds of stuff. So be sure that you're able to maybe add a little bit. These are the pros. Once maybe post a little thing. You can mention that you have a Facebook page, but don't give them the link. They can send you a private message, or, if somebody actually says, oh, no, this is great, I'm really, really interested, blah, blah, then you could certainly send them a message with the link. But just be careful because, there's a lot of kooks out there. Okay, so what's the difference between the first reading and the second reading? Normally, every ordinance has two readings. The first reading, a council member brings it up, then the entire council discusses it, and then they vote on whether to advance the ordinance to the second reading. So theoretically, they can have so much opposition. If you have one person on council that wants this and the other ones don't, that they vote it down as of the first reading. No, we're not going to discuss this any further. It's done. Granted, that doesn't happen much, but that's really what could happen. So they discuss it, and then usually, and again, towns are different. The general public usually can't give any comments on the proposed ordinance at the first reading. So if at all possible, if you have that person on council, can they get you a copy of the proposed ordinance? Look for items that you like or dislike so that you can be prepared. If you can't make comments immediately after, so they'll vote on it, they're never going to say, okay, public portion is open to discuss this ordinance. That's not going to happen. Possibly when at the end of the meeting, when they're all done with all their ordinances or whatever, and usually council meetings, they rarely last an hour. A lot of our general council meetings are like 20 minutes. So at the end, they do have public portion. And whether if you stand up and say, I'd like to say a few words about the proposed chicken ordinance, I guess they have the right to say, no, we can't have you do that, but maybe they would. So it doesn't hurt to try. And try to have one or two people with you at a first reading. You don't have to have the whole group because you may not be able to even say anything. So if they have the time and they're willing to come and sit with you and whatever, if you have the opportunity, you can use them. After that, say they passed it on to the second reading, they have to publicize it. Every town has a newspaper of record, and it's posted also normally posted in the municipal building, and definitely try to get a copy as soon as you can prior to the second reading. So whether you can contact the clerk and they could email it to you, it all depends on the individual person. All right, so I spelled it wrong. Second reading of the ordinance, then the mayor will be running this part. They'll say you're going to be voting on ordinance 24-12. Usually the year is first and then whatever one that they've done that year. And usually there's no discussion before the vote between council unless something came up. So maybe you told your contact, I really hate that idea of a limit on height of our chicken coop, our chicken run. We want to keep it clean. And they might agree with you. So there's a chance that one of them could bring up something. I'd really like to change this before we vote on it. Because once they vote on it, you're stuck. You may not stuck forever, but you're stuck. So there's a possibility they could have a discussion because they want clarification, or the more they read it, this part didn't make sense to them, whatever. So here's where any concerns you've expressed, either by emailing people on council or your friend on council or ahead of the meeting, they might be able to amend it, possibly. Because once they vote on it, even if it passes, you're probably stuck until, if it's a 2-year pilot, changing what you want changed, like we did for the to change it to an ordinance and whatever, make some changes. So this is where you want your groups to really show up. As I said, we had one side of the room and the other side, it was that standing room only when we had our second reading. But again, you really want to try to be organized. And I've been to a couple council second readings where we had some concern what was going to happen. And when they had public portion, nobody stood up with negative comments. So then you don't really have to say anything. I mean, if it looks like nobody's going to say a word, then you can certainly stand up and say that you're in support of this and you're really looking forward to this passing, something just to basically make them feel good. But here we tried to, well, first of all, my mayor had told me he knew they were going to pass it. And he said, so don't argue every little point with the people that stand up. We know, we've done our homework. This is going to pass. I'm sure a lot of places you wouldn't know that. But at any rate, then this person stood up about the tetanus shots. And it's like, we can't let that go. This was really like a political rally. You know, as soon as they said something really weird like that, then they're all, whoa, 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 tetanus shots. Oh my God. You know, they riled up their side. And it was so false. I mean, you know, you can let some things go past, it's garbage, but that was so out of normal that we had to argue that. We had to say, no, tetanus shots are every 10 years. And if you don't even have chickens, why are you worried? And even if you have a community garden or your garden, you should get tetanus shots because it's in soil. But anyway, so we really tried to go with what he said and just let it go. But wait and see what happens. You know, if there's no negatives, then, you know, you could say you're excited and ready and hope that everything passes. Then they vote and it either passes, as we hope, or it fails. So that is the end of our program. And please feel free to email me with any questions, gbale@verizon.net. And that'll be the end of our program. Thank you very much for your attendance.